Well, good morning. Can you believe it? Just 3 weeks to go until New Hampshire voters go to the polls in the nation's first presidential primary. And you want insight? You have it here this morning. No one knows more about the history and the current state of play in the New Hampshire primary than James Pindell, the ace political reporter and analyst for the Boston Globe. Hi, Ace. Good to see you.
With that introduction, my goodness.
Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
You're a busy man these days. James, Bernie Sanders looked like he'd seen a ghost the other night when Elizabeth Warren gave him that post-debate tongue lashing that we've now all heard about. What impact, if any, is this dust-up likely to have in Iowa and New Hampshire?
You know, you want to write off these moments and say, oh, that's just a moment and people forget about it and it doesn't really mean anything. Actually, I think this means a lot. Remember structurally here, this is basically a four-way race in both Iowa and in New Hampshire. There's only one woman in that top four, and Warren really hasn't really played that card, but there's a lot, I know you know this, there's a lot of people inside that Democratic Party base who really want to see the first female president. Now look, structurally speaking, we have to get into the weeds for a second, but here's where I actually do think the impact will be most felt by this interaction and this dust-up, frankly, between her and Sanders. You know, in Iowa, they have a weird caucus system, and basically the first round, they tell people to get in a group. So you'll walk in that corner if you're with Buttigieg, that corner if you're with Biden, this corner if you're with Warren. And if you add up all the bodies in the room and you don't have 15% for one candidate,
you're out.
You're out. And they tell those candidates, oh, were you with Andrew Yang? Were you with Amy Klobuchar and you didn't get 15%? Yeah. Find another group to join. Yeah. And that's where, if I'm a woman in particular, and remember, women make up 57% of Iowa Democratic caucus goers. And I went for my first choice and it didn't work out. I can see how they take that interaction and say, you know what, I'm going to go with a woman.
Especially women.
Absolutely.
And so Amy Klobuchar is pulling, what, 7%
or so
in Iowa?
Yep.
So if she doesn't get the 15 in any given caucus, where are those people going to go?
And remember, that 7% is huge. 7% is basically between first place right now and where Warren's at. It makes up probably the ballgame.
Well, what about New Hampshire?
So coming out of Iowa, coming out of that particular thing, we come to New Hampshire, as you mentioned, and of course there's no other state in the country that has elected more women to office than in New Hampshire. Right. Jeanne Shaheen, the U.S. Senator, is the first woman to ever serve as governor and as a U.S. Senator in American history. The second person to do that is the other senator, Maggie Hassan. Mm-hmm. And of course, you can go down the line in terms of state houses and state reps and all that and members of Congress. There is a history of electing women. There's a history of electing the next door neighbor. If Warren comes out of Iowa with a little bit of momentum, she may be the person to watch. But right now, she's obviously solidly in fourth place.
We've heard a lot about organization. How many campaign offices a candidate has, which big-name organizers they've hired. Is that really going to matter?
In Iowa, yes. In Iowa, there's a way to win. It's called the Nagel Rule, after a former congressman. Rule number 1 is to organize. Rule number 2 is to organize. And rule number 3 is, well, to get hot at the end. Mm-hmm. So organization is a field person's dream in Iowa. You literally need neighbors to stand up for you and say, come to my group. New Hampshire is much more about message, and it's much more about momentum. So organizing obviously matters to some degree, but not to the degree that it does in Iowa.
Is it possible, before we take a break here, James, that Joe Biden might be a beneficiary of this Warren-Sanders rift? Because we've talked about Warren supporters and women who might wind up being Warren supporters being energized. The Sanders people are certainly energized. If they're splitting the vote, doesn't that open up a nice pathway for Joe Biden?
You're right. There's a rule in politics. If A and B are fighting, C tends to win.
Yeah.
In this particular case, I don't think it's been that vicious about attacking each other. It's been about this one particular issue. But that is certainly the dynamic that progressives are very scared about right now.
Yeah, and if you look at Twitter, it's pretty vicious. But Twitter's always vicious.